literary studies in comparative literature, which I studied at Columbia University in New York. I worked particularly on the literary reviews and the people who moved to different cities in order to participate in literary culture, in particular in small reviews in the interwar years and then in the post-war years. And my work sort of extended between France, Germany, and the UK. In lots of respects, that kind of work in literary reviews and that sort of cosmopolitan population was what sort of got me really interested in thinking about the ways in which cities work, the ways in which in particular migrant populations move to cities, establish themselves, and how that kind of changing mix of culture impacts on city life. And so my research in the past 15 years or so has become increasingly focused on understanding urban problems, and particularly on how to kind of take a critical stance with regard to some of the prescribed solutions that stem particularly from local authorities and then also state actors. And I'm particularly interested in finding ways to sound out the marginalized cultural and social experiences. And in that respect, I still work a lot with literary materials, in translation workshops, working between languages. And so I've kind of put here on the slide as a way of just situating how I like to approach work and how that informs the graduate study that I lead on in the Institute, is that on the one hand, my work now takes me towards some of these very sort of formal advisory bodies, whether they be within the leading architecture schools in Paris, but also with the local authorities. And yet at the same time, I remain very committed to working in a kind of very direct, engaged way in local community action. And so I've noted here that I'm involved a lot in situations around food solidarity, a free breakfast movement in Paris. And quite a lot of my work stems from the kind of situations that are built around food solidarity in the city. My first book was entitled The Extreme In-Between. It dealt a lot with literary culture, but the whole posture of being in between two cultures, French and British culture in particular, in between languages, in between settings, the formal ones, as I said, of architectural study and architectural history, and also the much more informal ways in which city life works on the margins in makeshift ways that often work really well as well. And that remains very key to how I approach my own research. And I think to some aspects of the program that we lead on here in Paris. So now I'm going to move to talking a little bit more about the Institute in Paris and introducing that and giving you a sense then of where we sit, sort of, as I say, in some respects, always in between at least two cultures, but very much in the heart of the mix of the incredible convergence of cultures that's characteristic of global cities today. So the University of London Institute in Paris is one of the leading UK institutes in continental Europe. It's also one of the oldest UK institutes and one of the oldest players, I would say, one of the oldest institutions of international study in the city of Paris. The institute's been around for over 100 years. It's part of the central academic body of the University of London, which itself is one of the oldest and largest and most diverse universities in the UK. The University of London, for those of you particularly joining perhaps from America who may not know the University of London so well, is really marked by its civic heritage. It's a university founded in the city and always engaged in the city. And likewise, I would say the Institute in Paris has always had a very strong connection to city institutions. It sits right in the heart of the 7th arrondissement, as I can show you here, alongside a number of the key governmental buildings, and its relation to the city in that respect is very direct, as is the University of London's itself, also in the heart of London. And together, the Institute and the university itself offers you access to an incredible wealth of library resources and city resources. Students who study with the Institute in Paris graduate with a University of London degree and benefit from the experience of a dual city sort of situation. So coming back to the Paris dimension, Paris is our campus, the city that you can see set out below you in this picture here. We are here in the 7th arrondissement tonight in a very beautiful early spring evening. I hope you can still see some of the sunlight that's going to come into this room. We are so fortunate in having the campus that we have right in front of the Invalides Esplanade, which is a large open green space very near the Seine. We're within walking distance of numerous monuments and museums, including the Musée d'Orsay, the Louvre, the Tuileries Gardens, the Grand Palais, the Petit Palais, and as I said, right in the heart of the kind of, the buildings around the National Assembly, which is within minutes of distance from here. And we really embed our teaching in the city. Our MA program really offers you immersion in site-based research. Many of our class sessions are led through site visits. Some of the teaching actually takes place in the street. Sometimes you do the visit and then you return to the seminar room. But we're very committed to working in experimental, strategic, pragmatic ways towards giving you the skills that you need to really analyze the complexity of urban situations. This is a little much more schematic map, which can show you a little bit where the Institute is, just so you have your bearings around on central Paris here. And as I said, please do enter some questions if you have questions about where we sit in Paris and how students use Paris. And when we get to speaking with you, Kiru, I hope you'll be able to share a little bit on how you found your discovery and experience of learning from within the city. But for now, let me stay within the walls of the Institute, if you like. We're a very small institute. There are approximately 200 students studying at any one point in time. So it means that you're never lost in the crowd at the Institute in Paris. But I would also say that you encounter people from all over the world. And you also encounter students working at various different levels, undergraduates, but also students working towards doctorates. And for those of you considering graduate study, I think that connection between students in an MA program and students studying towards a PhD is a really positive thing. We have a very strong trajectory of students coming from our MA study here into PhD study. The last time I did the kind of assessment of that, we were at around 40% of our students who studied for the MA who've been successful in going on towards doctoral study. And they've done that in institutions in other colleges of the University of London, King's College, Goldsmiths, UCL. They've also often stayed with us, which has been a really great aspect. So we have several students at the moment. I think I have 3 students I'm supervising to PhD who started with the MA. They're working on a range of different topics, from colonial artifacts and their representations within museums to the Holocaust, kind of issues to do with Holocaust remembrance and the kind of concentrationary system that was actually at play even in Paris. So a kind of a version of a concentration camp that actually existed within the city of Paris during the Second World War. And there's a student working as well on urban heritage in Slovenia and Macedonia, which is a much more extended project out beyond the immediate boundaries of the Parisian focus that I'm going to be concentrating on this evening. So that's just to give you an idea of what the kind of connections between our MA and our PhD are. I think there's it's a really nice aspect of the graduate community at the Institute. And more generally, this is a very friendly and very cosmopolitan place. We are therefore, I think the word a hub is a really good way for describing the way in which studying at the Institute feels. A focused environment with a very strong concentration on issues to do with city studies, mobility, political ecologies. Some of my colleagues have a background that comes more through international politics and climate politics. Others are historians by training. We have a strong grounding, as I've said already, in contemporary cultural production and in the humanities. And in that respect, our work is very much at a kind of interdisciplinary intersection that is so characteristic and so strong and important, I think, when studying cities, both from a historical point of view and also in terms of the future challenges and possibilities for urban life. We also have a very strong focus on contemporary visual culture. My colleagues are specialists in film studies, even in television series, and also in graphic novels. So that's another aspect of the work here, which I think is really strong and important, and also a lot of fun. We run regular events, academic talks for students and for the general public throughout the year. I've put a couple of recent ones on the slide here just to give you a sense of the sort of people who come through the Institute. We're not just a hub for our students and faculty engaged in the sorts of research questions that are ours as well, but we're also a really important kind of gateway for colleagues from the UK more broadly, but most specifically from London, to bring their work to a European audience. That's one of our missions. And so, as I say here, we have had recently Professor Christoph Linder, who's president of the RCA, who joined us to speak about the aesthetics of the immersive city, the way in which the city is becoming increasingly like an immersive, digitalized environment. And then also Claire Melhuish of UCL, who came to talk about the legacy of the Olympic Games, the legacy of the London Games in 2012, and how that's comparing to the ways in which Paris has approached the Olympic Games from 2024, so 12 years later, and the sort of legacy questions that are going to be there for Paris in the wake of the 2024 Games. So those are just a couple of examples that can give you a feel for the ways in which we're trying to really establish a bicultural, cross-channel environment. And of course, we open that up to much broader questions as well about urban culture, whether that be in the Anglophone world or in the Francophone world in particular. But not only, we had also another talk this year where the speaker was coming from Argentina and giving us a sense of what some of the challenges are as well around community organizing in particular, and native community rights in Argentina. Another really important aspect of the broader research environment of the Institute is the Bannister Fletcher Fellowship in Urban Studies. And you can see that on the bottom of the slide there on the left-hand side. The Bannister Fletcher program is an initiative that I run, in fact, which is really which enables us to invite a leading scholar every year to build a program of collaborative exploration around a subject area of their choice. So we've had scholars who've worked on the ideas of marginalized and peripheral cultures and the kind of notion of the urban life at the extensions, with a very strong focus on Black life, and that was led by Professor Abdul Malik Simon. We had another program that was read around questions of wilding the city and urban agriculture. And this year we're working with Professor Françoise Vergès, who's a leading feminist decolonial scholar. And she's running a program which will be taking place in April and May around the notion of the post-museum and what sort of institution do we need to address some of the questions that are so challenging for museums today, whether that be around issues of restitution of looted cultures or questions of access, display, inclusion, adaptability. So many questions which are so challenging for museums today that we're going to be working on those together, both in London and Paris. And students who register in the MA in Urban Culture and History, or students who are studying towards a doctorate with us, are really not only encouraged to participate in those workshops, but supported to do so as well, as part of what we aim to do to enable students to move between different spaces, Paris and London, but also different spaces in the city. Most of the work that we do through the Bannister Fletcher program is done in city institutions. And this year we'll be working with the Whitechapel Gallery in London and with the Cité Internationale des Arts in Paris. So that just gives you a sense, I think, of how we are, the Institute is, as you've seen from the slides, that it's a very lovely building right in the center of town. It's an old townhouse, which is built as townhouses always were in Paris, in a very up and down way. So it's a very vertical building. But up from that vertical building in the center, we spread out in lots of different ways. So let me say a little bit more, and I'll try and speed up a little bit on the urban history and culture. So the MA in Urban History and Culture was created in the wake of a really, I think, important turning point in Parisian history. So the program opened in 2017, and it followed that moment in Paris, which was such a strong, which was a combination of both horror and optimism, the horror of the terrorist attacks of 2015 and the optimism that that underpinned the bid to host the 2024 Olympic Games, which were really conceived as the first social games, but not just the first social games, also the first games which were not going to be about building new infrastructure, but rather about repurposing, transforming, adapting existing infrastructure, so existing sites within the city. And so there's a very important sort of change towards the repurposing, reuse, recycling, and trying to see how the city can sort of function differently towards different social ends, as opposed to always being, around the kind of new investment. So in that kind of moment of quite substantial, I would say, social and climate-related optimism, let's remember that 2015 was also the year in which the Paris Agreement was signed, around issues of trying to curb the degrees of climate of heat gain in the planet. So it was a moment as well, I think, 2015, of climate optimism, which might today feel somewhat jaded, we might feel somewhat how can we say, more pessimistic about that. But that moment was very much at the kind of origin of our decision that we wanted to really position the Institute of Paris around some of these new horizons that were opening up for urban policy. But at the same time, to really build on the strengths and the singularity, I think, of the community of researchers at the Institute, by making sure that we underpinned this approach to urban studies through a very strong historical inflection. Paris is one of the great historical cities. And our program is really based on the belief that it's a historical understanding of cities that will enable better planning and adaptation to future challenges. A lot of work in urban policy focuses on technical solutions. And we're really interested in our program in giving students the chance to assess how technical solutions have functioned in the past. So, for example, looking at the ways in which the history of science and the history of medicine interacts with urban history, the ways in which colonial history, commercial history interacts with urban history, the ways in which even the questions to do with the decorations, the tables, the pictures, the materials that we have in our domestic interiors, and how those are conditioned by types of migration, by the relation to other places in the world, and how that has transformed the demography of cities. So we're confident that our program really gives students a kind of a deep embedded perspective on the longue durée of urban history, and that is fundamental for being able to address urban development in meaningful ways. Our program also is extremely fortunate in allowing students to anchor their work in two of the great world capitals, two of the major imperial metropolises, two cities that are both very close and very different, London and Paris. So our program is delivered in partnership with Queen Mary University of London, which is a world-ranked research university with a really vibrant School of History. And it's with the School of History and the School of Geography that we work most closely. So we have colleagues who come from London to teach you in Paris during the first term. So during semester 1, all students on the MA program spend that term, that semester, the autumn in Paris. But London comes to you, if you like, with world experts who bring you perspectives, not just on London or on Paris, but also on New York, also on the port cities of the Pacific Basin. I'm trying to think about other other insights and there's a really important session that's led as well around West African cities. So that first course where you have people coming across from London really also kind of opens up perspectives onto different world cities. You have the choice of spending spending semester 2 either in Paris or in London. If you choose to go to London, you will study at the Queen Mary East End campus at Mile End. If you stay in Paris, you stay with us. You stay in the 7th arrondissement, and again, you choose a series of elective modules in term 2. And all students study together, even if they're in the London-Paris, even though split between London and Paris, all students study to the same objectives around the final dissertation. You don't need to declare to us when you apply if you were choosing the Paris route only or the Paris-London route. You can give us an indication, but you don't need to absolutely finalize that choice until the autumn. What will you study? Well, here are some of your questions, but I think here are some of our questions, sorry, and perhaps your questions as well, but hopefully you're putting your questions in the chat. I'll let you just kind of get a sense of those from reading them rather than kind of dwelling on them at great length. Hopefully, as you kind of skim through those, you can see that we're moving as much as, moving in different ways between questions that relate to cultural production, poetry, photography, but also architecture, the ways in which where the places where that architecture and cultural production emerges, locates, whether it's in the center of the city, on the edges of the city, whether it's perceived today as an aspect of prestige or an aspect of, an aspect that is in a way requires demolition, even perhaps, as is still the case for quite a lot of the brutalist architecture in Paris. We're also interested in some of the more policy-oriented questions around issues to do with transport, to do with urban infrastructures, and addressing some of the questions of the overheating city today. And then, of course, we're interested in the ways that will intersect with questions to do with political movements and social movements within the city. And so I'm, just to give you an example of the way in which we're trying to think about the contemporary city through as well historical perspectives, we might hopefully, with some of you, have the opportunity to think about whether or not contemporary movements such as the Occupy movement is a continuation or a transformation of some of those older occupations that were so characteristic of the 1960s in large cities, and particularly in Paris, where May 68 remains a huge cultural reference. Okay, you will study core modules in term 1. So everybody studies together towards these core modules, and they are supported by a non-assessed exploratory methodology course. So term 1 is very much a kind of cohort building moment. You meet a lot of different academic faculty, including all the academic faculty that's involved in the MA program in Paris. But you also build a group identity. And again, I'll be, offering Kiru the chance to speak a little bit about how the student group works. But my impression as a member of faculty is that it's always a pleasure to work with the MA group, because it builds such strong relations in the group, and people really have the opportunity of sharing their experience of learning from the city, in the city, with the city, and that makes for very strong cohort relations, and that's an extremely important aspect, that peer experience in your learning at the Institute in Paris. There are, in the second term, a range of research-led option courses. Some, as I said, at the University of London, Queen Mary, University of London, and some in Paris, depending on your route through the second half of your MA. And there is, of course, the MA dissertation, a 12 to 15,000 word dissertation. Kiru will perhaps be willing to share an idea of what she's thinking of doing. Perhaps, maybe it's too early, but I'll just give you a little sense of some of the topics that students have written about in recent years. Deaf history and culture in Paris, a really important topic on the ways in which the city had accommodated and addressed issues of of deafness within the city, the queer politics of pre-AIDS Paris nightlife, and the study of the Palace Club, a massively important institution in cultural life in the 1980s. The development of Paris Plage and the sand industry, which sounds kind of crazy, but was a really fascinating dissertation, which, as I recollect, scored an extraordinarily high final result. It was a brilliant piece about the fact that the Paris local authorities have had a project to build a beach every year in the city along the banks of the Seine and along the banks of one of the main canals in the city. And it's a kind of leisure resort for people who are in the city through the summer, but it's sponsored by one of the major multinationals in the sand industry, and which raises all sorts of interesting questions about public policy, which were addressed in that dissertation. And you can see a couple of the others on the screen as well. So I shall keep moving. Where does the MA in Urban History and Culture take you? Well, it takes you, first of all, towards a recognized postgraduate qualification from the University of London. It takes you towards a network as well of graduates of the University of London, which is extremely rich, diverse, and international. It gives you as well access to the London Careers Group, which is really important. It gives you the opportunity to develop second language competency. All students who register at the University of London Institute in Paris have the opportunity of joining French language classes, whether they're starting from nothing or already have some French language. And of course, it's going to give you really strong intercultural skills and a range of project management skills. Our graduates have gone on to the list of things that you can see here: writing, journalism, museum curation and archival work, but also work in agency contexts around urban agriculture, environmental consultancy. They've gone on to work in local and European policy contexts. They've gone on as well to academia and teaching, and in that respect, as I said earlier, a high percentage of our graduates from the MA program have moved successfully on to postgraduate research in the form of a doctorate. So just very briefly, the PhD at the Institute in Paris, for those of you who are joining out of interest in studying towards a postgraduate research degree rather than an MA. It's a really unique opportunity to study towards postgraduate research here. On the one hand, you benefit from the research environment of the University of London, and more specifically of the School of Advanced Study. We deliver our PhD in Paris with the School of Advanced Study, so you have access to the wealth of research training modules that the School of Advanced Study offers, and to the experts who are, associated with the school, whether that be in the Institute for Languages, Cultures and Societies, the Institute of Historical Research, the Institute of English Studies, the Institute of Advanced Legal Studies, the Warburg Institute. These are all member institutes of the School of Advanced Study with whom we work here in Paris. But of course, you get the opportunity, if you study at the University of London Institute in Paris, of benefiting from the cultural and political vibrancy of the city, one of the most densest university cities and library cities in the world, a huge student population. 10% of the population in Paris is made up of students, and the city remains incredibly dedicated to enabling that 10% of the population to remain relatively low income student body. So there are huge numbers of initiatives that are led by the city for students. It's a really strong aspect of municipal policy, and one that we also address as a kind of, as a research question for us in the context of the work that we do here. So you have a sense of some of the supervision areas that we cover, a strong emphasis obviously on urban culture, urban heritage, how that relates to what we call the GLAM sector: galleries, libraries, archives, museums. But we also have a strong focus on issues to do with migration, colonial history, environmental humanities, and of course, our more traditional subject areas, if you like, which are the literature and visual culture. The program structure for a PhD is relatively classic. You study towards an MPhil first, you move through an upgrade process and then onto a PhD. A PhD is a thesis of up to 100,000 words. You can study full time or part time. And we're delighted always for people who are interested and have a research topic to send us an outline, a short outline would be the first move in that respect. So I realize I am sinking into the dark here. I'm going to call on Kiru and turn some lights on because it's getting extremely dark in this room. So Kiru, how could you tell the group that's online with us this evening a little bit about yourself, what you studied previously and why you chose to come to Paris?
So, hi, I'm Kiru, and my background is in architecture, and I specialize in historic conservation. And I chose this course because I wanted to specialize in history and heritage and to learn about the urban environment of the global cities, London and Paris. So I had an opportunity to study about the global city, London, when I was in Oxford doing my historical conservation. And this MA uh, this MA helps me to come to Paris and explore the city through the modules which I have been learning. So yeah, it's been really great.
Okay, thanks, Kira. That's really so. So, what was it that really brought you to Paris in particular? What is it? What was the what were you looking for when you came to Paris?
So Paris, like for me, I came from Pondicherry, India. So Paris has always been with me from my childhood. So that is my first thing which motivated me to aspire my education here in Paris. And for to be honest, like the architecture and the culture here in Paris, really like it's really amazing. And being an architect, it just moved towards the European culture. So that was my first step coming to Paris and choosing this course as well.
Okay, that's great. So, how did you prepare for your move? What were the things
Uh,
that you felt you needed to get in place before you made this big move from Pondicherry to Paris? It's a bigger move than some
yeah,
make. So, um,
yeah. So my first thing was I started learning French, and French was my second language, but I wanted to be more conversational, so I decided to join a French class in my locality. And then I concentrated on my research subjects for a while because I know I'll be doing my research on urban history and culture. So I was like learning throughout all my previous research papers and everything. And about for moving, I was really preparing myself like mentally to accept the environment because I know it will be difficult for not knowing the language, but I was like, this is my new step and this is the step which I longed to take. So, yeah, I prepared myself really mentally and so many things like preparing my things back from India. So it's like taking some things from India is like a small piece of home here. So just keeping that in my mind. Yeah. And that was my preparation because I'm used to moving here and there. So this is my second big move from UK to Paris. So
Yeah,
yeah.
I remember actually you're bringing back to me the that first afternoon. I think it was a Friday afternoon when we met, when we did
Yeah.
that first field trip out, and you'd been
Yeah.
in the city for less than 24 hours, and there you were.
Yeah.
We didn't know to expect you almost. You know, it was. I
Hmm.
remember. Yeah.
Yeah, it was like crazy, and I moved here like in a really short period of time. So yeah, it the experience is great. Till now, it's really great. So
Yeah, you were
Yeah.
very courageous, and but I would say that I can use that as just a way of reassuring people who are online this evening and who may feel like I don't know if I could do that, if I could just plunge in and join a new program and move to a new city and so on. One of the things that I would say about the institute, whether it be at the student support services or even with the academic faculty, as I said earlier, it's a small institution. We are aware when students are just arriving or when they're having difficulty. And as I'll show you in a minute when we move forward in the slides, our facilities really lend themselves to making sure that students feel like they have a foothold in Paris, a sense of belonging, I think. And that's absolutely vital in a big city when you're studying for perhaps just 1 year or perhaps even just one term if you choose to come for the autumn term in order to return to Queen Mary and London for the second term. It can feel very quick and fast and intense, and it's important to feel that you know where you are in the city. Um, Now, how do you find living costs in Paris, Kiru?
Oh, it's really good actually compared to being in England. Here I can sustain myself without going for a part-time job, and it's been easier for me because I am the most expensive thing is going out for food, but I cook well, so that that's one thing. And yeah, and other than that, the living cost is the transportation is the first cost, which will be like we have to take a Navigo pass, and that is one thing. And other than that, we have everything like some of the museums free, and if you are like 25 and no, under 25, all the museums are free, all the libraries are free. So that is like a really great thing to just go and explore. So I'm using some of that things like in every Sunday each month, some of the museums are free and the libraries are free. So
Yeah.
I'm using that. And yeah, uh, it's comparative to, for me, comparatively studying in Oxford and here, I will be choosing Paris for the living cost. Yeah, it's actually like I can manage it.
Right. Good. That's really
Yeah.
great to hear. I'm delighted to hear that. I mean, I can add a little bit some of the more, let's say sort of, the slightly more official information about living costs, one of which is that students in Paris from whatever origin benefit from housing benefit if they have if they're renting accommodation through those sort of formal mechanisms of having a lease in their own name, they're able to apply for housing benefit.
Mhm.
Travel costs are kind of flat across the whole of the urban area of Paris. So, and they're much cheaper than London. So you can move around, for example, to the airport, out to monuments and parks in the larger Paris area without any increased cost. As Kira was saying, there's all amount of effort is made to enable students in particular to access culture. So, you can, if you queue up, you can get last minute tickets to the opera, as in fact my son did last night even. He got a €10 ticket to the Opéra de la Bastille, where tickets are often selling for, over €150. But these things are genuinely possible. And there's a real commitment, I think, on the part of the city to subsidizing student life, as I said earlier. So yeah, there's a lot to, you can also spend a lot of money in Paris, certainly, but it's really good to hear you, Kira, say that you find it a sustainable, a place where you can live in a sustainable way. Okay, what's it like to study at a small university? So how have you found the smallness of the institute?
It's for me it's like it does feel like a second home because it's really small and I know everyone there, and that's a really big thing, like knowing everyone, every staff member knows my name and they'll be like, "Hi Kiru, good morning," and I'll be like, "Okay." So yeah, it's a really new thing, and yeah, it's great to be in a small place. And uh, for me, comparing with my sorry that I'm comparing my studies, but being in a vast universities and being in a small group of friends, and now like being in a small university and talking to faculty members and getting to know them even more and using their updates and the feedback into my like my assignments or essays and my research, which is like moving towards my dissertation, feels really amazing because the help from the faculty members I'm getting here, it's really great. And I think that is like a perk of being in a small university. Everyone knows you, so yeah, that is really good.
Okay, cool. And tell us what inspires you and what your chosen research area is. Now, this is a sensitive thing for me to ask Kiru because she's probably thinking, oh no, I don't want to have to talk about that now online on a Wednesday evening. But, maybe it's just think about, you're not talking to me as as one of the faculty, you're talking to the people online. Tell them what's been inspiring you and what you think you might be doing your further research on.
So, history inspires me, like the history and the story behind it. Architecture inspires me, the technical terms, the techniques which are used, building the places, building the city, the urban landscapes. Yeah, and that inspires me, and heritage and the cultural value of each place in this world inspires me. And that's why I chose my specialization to be in heritage history, learning about urban culture. So that is my like my first inspiration to choose my own way in the stream of architecture. And my research is going towards heritage as well, like conservation as well. And with help of my professors and one of my professor here, like I'm moving towards all my research on colonial heritage research and the colonial architecture, which has been established in the period of colonization. So that is where my research is going right now.
Yeah.
Maybe it will change, I don't know.
Yeah.
So at the moment, it's there. So
Yeah, I think it's been, I remember one of the first essays you wrote, Kira, that we talked about last term, where so this was on one of the core modules, and it was
mm,
about the role of the press, where the context in which you did that work
yeah,
was about the role of the press in kind
mm,
of in giving a sense of what urban consciousness was in the 19th century and how that built a sort of sense of belonging, particularly
mm,
for sort of a French bourgeois urban society, how that happened by kind of positioning the British colonial class
mm,
and the subjugated Indian colonial people. So it was a
yeah,
fascinating sort of triangulation between French nationalism and urbanism,
mm,
English colonialism, and the representation of the subjugated Indian nation.
yeah,
It's been really great the way in which you've drawn from your own Indian heritage and your knowledge of vernacular architecture in Pondicherry in particular to kind of think through that around questions of colonial representations. So I'm glad to hear you're
yeah.
still thinking of pursuing that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good, good, good. All right. What are your plans after you graduate?
Oh yeah, I'm gonna work like in certain areas like my strength is architecture, so I'll be working in architecture, but my passion is towards heritage. So I'm looking for jobs in heritage conservation, museums, archives. So that is my plan. And maybe in the future, like in the far future, I might open my own firm for historic conservation. So let's see. Hopefully it happens.
Yeah. All power to that, Kira. All power to you.
Thank
Okay.
you.
How have you found the academic and pastoral support? So on the little slide here, you've got, for those of you online this evening, this is a scene from the Student Services Office, and
Mm.
we're moving maybe perhaps a little bit to thinking about some of the facilities at the Institute here. So how have you found that, Kira? How have you found yourself supported? Around
Oh, it's been amazing. Like for the meetings I have been calling my professors on, like I'm like whenever my assignments reach to a stage, I'll be like, okay, I really need help from this professor. I really need help from them, and just mail, and they'll be like, okay, we are here, and we'll sort it out, and we'll discuss, and we'll brainstorm, and everything will be like sorted, and yeah, I'll be like, okay, this is it, and my works will be done in no time with the help of my professors and with the help of the library team. Like they actually like find my learning books. If I am having any difficulties in finding any book, they'll come in and they'll be like, okay, there is like a book here in this library. You can go and you can get it. And we'll just mail them and tell them that you'll be coming here. So that is that support, like the support from the research background and support from my professors has been like really great for me. And that is what is like helping me to keep my calm because I spiral out. So yeah, that has been great. Yes.
Okay, yeah, we're very fortunate at the institute to have a fantastic librarian, Kim
Mhm.
Lemin, and also to have our own library is one of the really nice aspects of the building here, and just generally of the kind of classroom area. The first floor is where all the classrooms and seminar rooms are, and right in the middle of it is this really lovely library. I think there's a slide with the picture of the library later on, and it's a real kind of center of life. So I think it's a privilege to be able to work in that library. Which have been your favorite site visits?
Oh, the site visit which we did last like 2 weeks before Leal.
Oh, right. Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's been like I don't know, I'm dreaming about Leal right now. I it's like yeah, it's been amazing because I have been to places with heritage, like the old places in Paris,
Hmm.
but Leal was the first place which had the newest urban design on
Right.
the city center. So that was like a really great example for me to like look for urbanism in the city center, right in the heritage, history oriented area. There was like a big urbanized form of layout. So that was my interesting site visit. For me, it's my favorite one.
Okay, that's great. So for those of you who know Paris well, you'll recognize this, the Les Halles Center, sort of what is essentially a major commercial center, but it's also a very historic center. And it's true that it's built around a medieval church and a medieval fountain, which was absolutely at the heart of civic life at the time because it was the source of good, reliable, clean water. It was also where there was a major cemetery. So, and that's, I think, is one of the things that Q is really interested in, is that long history, that kind of almost like a sort of sedimentation. And in that space, you can go all the way down into the depths of the city. You're right down at the layers in the earth where they were laying the bodies, and then right up to some of the greatest contemporary architecture of the city at the moment. And I think, yeah, it's
Yeah.
that sort of, it's attempts to bridge that. So maybe I can even throw that back a little bit to how we have to think in between the old city and the new city in order to understand what's happening in urban culture. I think how it pulls from these long histories, but at the same time throws itself towards these new forms. And it's true that Leal is such an incredible site in that respect. Yeah. I'm going to be hearing Kiru talk more about that tomorrow in class, right, Kiru?
Yeah.
Okay, moving on. Right. Have you any other advice? I suspect this is the last question we have for you. Do you have any things that you feel you would like to share with people as they're listening online tonight before they start asking their questions themselves?
Um, just feel comfortable moving around the city and enjoy your 1 year or a semester of being in Paris. Explore the city, and the city speaks like really great, other than the people. So the it's like a really amazing experience. And being in this course, you'll be like learning about so many things in depth with history, urban culture, and architecture. For me, being an architect and viewing the city through my architecture lens, this MA program helped me to view the city in different prisms. So that is my take from this MA. And it was like a really great experience, and it is still a really great experience. And I am like really, how to say, like really grateful for this opportunity, because I know like how difficult it is to get acceptance letter from the institute. So when I got my acceptance, I was like, wow, we made it. Yes, it was like that. So yeah, and it's not like I'm giving any advice, just come here to like enjoy your time in Paris, and this MA will be a stepping stone for your career, as well as if you are like going to pursue a PhD, it will be like a stepping stone for your future endeavors. So yeah,
That's great. Thank you so much, Kira. I'm very
thank
touched to
you.
listen to you. Okay, so I'm not going to say much more at this point. I think I want to open this up to questions because time is ticking on. You have some information here on this slide about the funding. You'll see some pictures of our facilities. I think we've covered quite a lot of ground in terms of the sort of support and the sort of opportunities that the program and study more generally, also towards postgraduate research, enables at the University of London in Paris. So
thanks, Anna. Yeah, if we want to pause on the slides for now, just so we can make sure we get through a few of the questions that have come through. So the first question is from Emmy. And Emmy says, do PhD students generally receive funding? If so, is this mostly from internal or external sources?
Okay, so the funding question, we don't have anything on the funding for PhDs here. The scholarship that I have referenced here is for the MA. There are alumni bursaries, and there is the Aziz scholarship, which would be open to people who want to study towards a PhD, but it has a quite specific remit. Otherwise, our funding for doctoral work at the Institute is essentially through the channel of the School of Advanced Study, because when you register to study for a doctorate, you register with the School of Advanced Study. So what I suggest is that you have a look at the pages for funding opportunities for the School of Advanced Study. It's associated with the London Arts and Humanities Partnership, which is known as the LAP. And as is UCL, King's, a number of other schools, I forget exactly who are part of the LAP. Queen Mary is also part of the LAP. So it's one of the major, possibly one of the biggest funding sources for doctoral study in the UK. It is quite competitive. And it's so those applications for doctoral fellowships through the LAP happen once a year. The deadline's in January, and students are informed of the success by about the month of April, and then for registry the following September. So we have had students who've been funded by LAP, but not all of the students are funded by LAP by any means. And so we also have students who are self-funding, who are working part-time, who are funded by sometimes by foundations in Paris. So we have a student who's applied for funding from the Shoah Foundation in Paris, for example. We have students who are also using funding that they have through previous employment. For example, there's bursaries associated with military service that people are able to access in order to support their postgraduate research objectives. So there's a range of different possibilities of that sort, but funding for PhDs is a challenge. So I think Ellie, the best I can say is that you need to have a look at the School of Advanced Studies site, explore opportunity, explore what you can see through that. Don't hesitate to be in touch with us if there's a very specific sort of trajectory that you're considering, and we're happy to answer, more direct inquiries like that.
Thanks, Eloise. And Emmy, I've added a link to the funding page in the chat against your question. Just mindful that we have about a minute left, so I'm just going to pick one question. But if we don't get your question in time, I'll post a link to our contact us form, and you're welcome to get in touch with us through that. Do ULIP students get access to the CRUS scheme, CROUS scheme?
Yes, the cruise scheme. Now, I don't know how many do, whether they pursue that, but yes, in principle, absolutely.
Great.
And the cruise scheme is great.
And then an easy one, what are the start and end dates of semesters 1 and 2?
Generally, it's in the welcome week is the 3rd week of September. Almost always, depends a little bit, but it's around that sort of time. Semesters are 12 weeks long with 1 reading week in the middle. So normally we're done by mid-December. And then classes start again around 20-something of January. So there's a good 5 weeks, I think, over the kind of winter break. And again, the second semester is 12 weeks long with a 1-week gap. If you're studying towards the MA, there's then a dissertation day, which takes place after the second semester has finished. And you finish your dissertation for the very early days of September of the following year. So it's a 12-month program. And you graduate formally by November of that year.
Great, thank you. And we are about to run out of time. There was another question about the possibility for French language learning at the Institute. So Jack, sorry we missed that one. I might get you to submit a query because the meeting's about to end in 8 seconds. So I just wanted to thank everyone for joining. We appreciate your time, and thank you to Anna-Louise for running today and Kiro for joining. Thanks,
okay,
everyone.
thank you, Kate. Thank you. Sorry we didn't manage to get to all the questions, but please feel free to reach out to us.